One of the difficulties we've had in discerning the calendar is trying to figure out from website to website when the actual crescent moon occurs. We know that this cannot be the new moon that is defined by science to be the dark moon, cannot be the new moon. God didn't say there was darkness on the face of the earth and God saw that it was good. No, it started out with darkness. There was nothing. And then there was light and God saw that it was good. And everything in nature tells that same story, that same pattern of God, that something shows up and that's what we call new. We wouldn't say, oh, look, there's nothing. It's new. We would never say that. That's just silly. And so if God was telling you to look for a new moon, then you would understand that when light showed up on the moon, that was new. But this has been quite the difficulty as I've been discerning the calendar to try to understand, well, when does the crescent actually appear? And some people who study this, which of course, these are the world's experts, they're not my experts. They'll say things like, well, technically the new moon starts, or the dark moon, what they're referring to, that it's only for a second, for an instant, and that the crescent appears the instant after the moment of the new moon and grows from there. In fact, I'm reading straight from someone's message. You won't be able to see it. It's too slender and dim to pick up with the naked eye. The records for sightings are somewhere around 15 hours after new moon with the naked eye and about 12 hours with the telescope. But even these are exceptional. As a practical matter, you probably won't be able to see the new crescent until the day after the new moon. So that's as good as science can do, but this is not what God would have us relying on, is it? It's vague, it's not specific, and God is specific, and he wants to establish the matters that he has ordained. So he's going to do this with precision. We know that. Now, I don't care what anyone says online, and I said this in a video, so I apologize. I'm not going to go back because what God has shown me is this is continuing to grow. Everything that he is teaching me, everything that he does in me, everything he has me talk with you about, there are things that he starts out with me teaching me, and then he teaches it to me in a particular way so that I can understand it, but it may not be 100% correct until he gives me the next piece, and then he gives me the next piece. But I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to correct it, because there are people on this channel who just want to get spoon-fed, and I know that. And I'm not going to waste my time going back and correcting something for people who just want to get spoon-fed and don't test these theories, who aren't trying to discern the calendar with us, who aren't, doing their own work to ask questions. And they're just waiting to see what's Carrie going to come up with. What's God speaking to Carrie about today? I don't think that's right. And I want to tell you something else. You're not going to be saved that way. You can't. It's not your covenant through Carrie. It's your covenant through Christ, and Christ expects certain things from you. So I'm going to leave what God, the pattern that God has taken me through, I'm going to leave it on the videos, not to present a stumbling block. I mean, these people who are doing this, they've presented their own stumbling block. I'm giving you more truth than you're getting from any of the false coward pastors. So if you are in your covenant, if you are testing this, if you are looking at the calendar, I'm going to continue to explain to you what God's revealing to me. Now, one of the things that I thought on a previous video is that if the new moon is every 29.5 days or 29.53 days or whatever, slight, very little variability, if any. If that is true, and it is true because I calculated it for an entire year, then everything is set in reference to it. And so as I was testing this theory, I discovered that is not true. It is not true that the crescent is going to be every 29.5 days or the full moon is going to be every 20. There's variability. There's actually variability. Even though there are these 7-day cycles, there is some variability. And so if you try to calculate based on any of these other cycles of the moon, except for the dark moon, which science calls the new moon. That's not the new moon. New moon is crescent. But the dark moon has 29.5 days between cycles. And it's virtually impossible to find any information on when the crescent shows up, because how would you even measure that? Like, you could look at the dark moon and say, okay, there's no light whatsoever. Now let's measure from this to that. But to get like perfect precision on how much light is being reflected on the moon is going to be extremely difficult. And so this is difficult for us to understand. When is this happening? But if we know that there's 29.5 days from new moon to new moon, then that's the thing that God has made consistent. There's our reference point. So if you're looking at the calendar from new moon, you're going to see that the moon before it is the last quarter. The moon before that is a full moon. The moon before that is a first quarter moon, and the moon before that is your new moon crescent. Those are your 4 weeks, and it just so happens that the new moon is going to be day 1 on God's calendar. The first quarter moon, 8 days later, because you have the first moon is going to be a rest day. Then you have 6 days of work and a 7th day of rest. That's going to bring us to the 8th day. So you have date 1, date 8, date 15, date 22, and the 29th will always be a dark moon. Those are all Sabbaths on God's calendar. And I've demonstrated in other videos that these line up with the Sabbaths that are in his feast days as well. Every single month, the dark moon, which is being called the new moon in science, the dark moon, that is always going to be the 29th day on God's month. So being that that's the 29th day on God's month, what you're going to find is that first of all, you want to count up from that dark moon. You're going to count up knowing that that's the 29th day. The week before is going to be the 22nd day. The week before that, 15th. Week before that, 8th. And then the week before that will be the 1st. And there's your crescent moon. Now you're going to notice, because there are 29 days, there are months that science has essentially said, well, we like whole numbers. And we like whole days. And so what they do is they'll say, well, there are 29-day lunar months and there are 30-day lunar months. But that's not how God defined a day. God defined a day as evening to morning. That was the first day. And so if evening to morning is the first day, what happens in between when there's like half a day? I know this is going to sound wonky, and I talked about it in a previous video, but if you have, for example, the dark moon is the day before what is being identified as the new moon, then you could actually have a new moon day, which begins somewhere in the evening, and that preceding day could actually represent 3 days. So let me give you an example of this. You have the 29th day, which is that dark moon day, the evening of the dark moon day, all the way until just before the evening of the 30th day. And now that day starts because the sun has gone down. And let's say that the sun went down around 6 p.m. And at 10 p.m., the new moon rises. So now you have a day that just got cut short. You have a 30th day that just got cut short because the new moon was like, get out of here. I'm starting a new month and a new day. I know that sounds really weird, but that's how it is because God established it that way. So, for example, we got to test this, okay? Has he ever done anything weird like that before? Has he ever done something weird like interrupted a sequence that he established? Okay, so he has established 4 7-day weeks in a month, and then a 30th day, and then a first day in the month. So there's like these transitions that don't fit into those 7-day sequences. So could he not disrupt a day? Yeah, he can disrupt a day if he wants. So you have that 30th day that is disrupting a sequence, or I should say transitioning a sequence, right? Now, in a previous video, I had talked about perhaps the new moon day was actually broken up. And so you had and I was basing this off of the dark moon conjunction times because I'd been calculating the dark moon conjunctions in order to test, whether or not there's 29.5 days from dark moon to dark moon. And so I thought, okay, well, if the dark moon is set at a particular time, then crescent could be set at a particular time. And depending on when that time is, you could have these breaks in your day. And so maybe there could be like a new moon in which you only have, that's only occurring during the day. But that wouldn't really make sense, and I'll tell you why. Because God has set the moon to start the new month and the new day and the new year. He hasn't done that any other way. And so it would have to be the 30th day that's being cut short. And if what we have is new moon to new moon is 30 days, is defined as 30 days, then it has to be that somewhere along the way, there's going to be this half day that's going to have to be accounted for. So, okay, so this is it. So on months where you have, I'm going to kind of map this out a little bit. In a month where you have, for example, January 12th was the new moon, January 12th, 2024 to February 11th, 2024. That's a 30-day month. So that's going to be pretty straightforward. When you look at the calendar, you're going to see that, okay, on the 29th day of the month, it begins in the evening. It ends just before evening the next day. The 30th day of the month starts that 30th day, in the evening, and then it's going to continue through the first day, and then that evening, new moon is going to begin, and that's going to be the first day of the month. That's straightforward. But then you're going to have February 11th to March 11th, and that's a 29-day month. And then you have March to April, and that's another 29-day month. And April to May actually ends up being a 30-day month, but then you have May to June, and that's a 29-day month. So what you're going to end up seeing on the calendar is you're going to have, when is the 29th of the month? It's always going to be on that dark moon. And so if your new moon is the day after, let's say dark moon is on the 10th of, a Gregorian month, and then new moon is on the 11th of a Gregorian month. Okay, so you've got them back to back. Then what's going to happen is you're going to have the 29th. That evening is going to begin. It's going to continue all throughout the day, the next day, until evening. And then the 30th of the month is going to begin. And whenever the new moon kicks in, somewhere during the night, it's going to kick the 30th day of the month out, and it's going to begin a new month and a new day. And if that's Nisan 1, then it's going to begin a new year. And it just so happens that the word tells us that God's moon is regulating days, months, and years, and appointed times. But see, that's sort of implied when you say that the moon is regulating days, months, and years. If I can, I'm going to try to upload these pictures so that you can have at least 2 months that have some sort of where you can get a visual. I am not a techie person, and I have to wait for my daughter to come. And, if I'm doing a video like this, then she may not be here for another 5 days. So then I'm not going to wait 5 days to post the video. But on the off chance that I can't post them, then go ahead and contact me. If you're actually, sorting through this and trying to discern, contact me and I'll email them to you. Now, I want to mention one other thing, because I've plotted these moons out so many times, and not just for like 1 year, but like for 10 years, I've plotted them out because I wanted to be able to really see and really test. And if you have 30 24-hour days, it's not going to measure up. There's literally no way. We know that there's 29.5 days, according to what we've defined to be a day, that there's 29.5 days in a month. The other thing that I had considered is, okay, well, if there's 29.5 days in a month, then maybe there's 23.6 hours in a day. Well, no, because God said he separated the light from the darkness. That's how he defined it. He didn't say anything about, calculating these hours. And when he talks about an hour, he's talking about what's going on at a given time. But he's not talking about this 60-second-minute, 60-minute hour that we talk about. So that can't be it. And besides the fact that if you start doing that, then now you have 0.4 adding up, 0.4 of a day adding up in a 30-day month, and now you have light where there's supposed to be nighttime, okay? So this is the only thing that can possibly make sense, and that is the only moon cycle that we could possibly set in reference to. I've tested all of it. And the other thing is that full moon has to be on the 15th. We know that because the word says, blow the trumpet on new moon, and when the moon is full on the day of our festival. I have seen that some people claim, well, that means, they're very adamant about it. That means that the full moon is the new moon. In this translation, blah, blah, blah. How about common sense? A full moon is not a new moon. I don't know why anyone would think that that's a new moon. A full moon is not a new moon. The passage says, blow the trumpet on the new moon and on the full moon on the day of our festival. Festivals usually occur on the 15th when we have a full moon. That lines up. In Luke 22, verse 1, for example, it says something about the Passover. So if the word wants to set something in reference to another thing, then it'll do it, and it'll do it clearly. So the word talks about the festival of unleavened bread, and it says, which is the Passover. It doesn't say the festival of unleavened bread and the Passover, because that means something totally different. So likewise, I would say, if God wanted for us to understand the full moon to be the new moon, he would have said something similar, like blow the trumpet on new moon, which is also the full moon. But if we look at God's pattern in nature and how he's designed things, he starts out small and then it blossoms into something and then it wanes back down. He doesn't start with something that's fully grown and then it wanes down and then it grows again. That's like a weird pattern, okay? It would be really weird to start the cycle right there. Like fully grown, wanes down, goes to nothing, then grows again, but not quite to the full moon. That is nowhere near what God has designed anything else to do. He wouldn't do it with his moon. Why would he change his pattern now? And nor would he say, and the earth was void and dark and everything was new. He wouldn't do that either. So why would he do that with the moon? The earth was void, it was dark, and then there was light, something new. Makes a little better sense, doesn't it? Okay, so we could not set, the full moon, by the way, could occur anywhere from 2 to 3 days. And so it's variable again, we can't really set the calendar in reference to that full moon. Sometimes when you're looking at the new moon, you're going to see that the full moon is it's like on different days, like maybe on the 14th of the month, the full moon is at 100%, but then on the 15th of the month, it's at 98.9. Well, with your naked eye, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. It's still a full moon. But if you set the calendar in reference to the full moon, you are going to get totally off track with all of these other cycles. So I've tested out all of these theories. I'm just letting you know in case you get that in your mind and you want to go test it. Feel free, but it doesn't work. So I'm just letting you know. You should test. You shouldn't just take my word for it. You should test whatever it is that God's leading you to test. But I'm letting you know these are things that these are also theories that I have tested and mapped out and spent a lot of time and detail to understand, and they just don't pan out. All right, that's what I've got for you today. I think it's really exciting. So now we know how God is defining a day, a month, a year. Now we understand why it is that on a lunar calendar, you have 354 days, according to what the world's been defining as a day to be. But then God says 360 days, according to what he's defining a day to be. Again, we're going to have to test this by actually looking at when that crescent shows up. So remember that, and this is one thing that I want you to remember as well, is that if you have a dark moon on the 29th, remember that you're talking about the evening. And so that 29th day is going to go into the next day. So you could also have a new moon that shows up, in the morning. So that, if that makes you feel a little better about the 30th day not being cut so short, it could show up in the morning too. So you could have the 30th day as going from, sundown to 7 a.m. and then the new moon shows up at 9:30 a.m. So there's that transition. But see, no one would really have known that with the naked eye when that was occurring. They would have just been counting down every 29 days and knowing that somewhere in there, the rooster's going to crow to alert them, here comes the new moon. Hey, I'm seeing light or whatever. You like my rooster voice? And so then you would know to go and look for it, that it's going to show up. And perhaps, I don't want to be adding something to the scroll. So let's not add anything to the scroll, but let's just consider that maybe this is why God had us observe 2 new moon days, so that then we are certain that we're going to see that new moon. Maybe one night's a cloudy night, I don't know. But again, it doesn't say that in the word. It's just, this is a way of us being able to try to understand these transitions. And maybe that's what God was doing, letting us know that it was going to show up. And, as a matter of fact, God does that, doesn't he? He tells us something's going to show up. Something's going to happen. He makes a promise to us that something's going to come. And sometimes we don't see it until we see it. Sometimes it's there, but we don't see it until he lets us see it. And that's the case with this crescent moon, is that it's there. The light is there, but sometimes it's not visible. So when you might have 0.7, illumination or something like that. Maybe that's not visible to you yet until God makes it visible, until he brings things into view. So let's just not add to the scroll, but just remember the things that God does, remember what his heart is, and why he might have established this in the way that he did. Thank you for listening. Please discern what I've said with God.